Welcome everybody to Charted's Proof Over Promise, what real AI invoice processing looks like in NetSuite. This is part of our Charted Invoice AI Masterclass, and this is session 1 out of 3 that we will be putting on. So we'll do some quick introductions first before we go over the agenda. Hi everyone, my name is Emma Knox. I am the manager of the Solutions Consulting team here at Charted, and I'm located in Sarasota, Florida. And then I'll hand it over to Mike to do a quick introduction.
Yeah, my name is Mike Johnson. I'm one of our product managers here at Charted. I'm focused on one of the products I'm focused on is our Invoice AI solution, which is what we're going to be talking about here today. And I'm based just outside of Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. All right, we'll go through this agenda for today. So what we'll be doing is talking about what the accuracy myth is and what you guys can measure instead for your AI invoice processing system, how Invoice AI learns, some AI directions and how we can utilize those for some edge cases that you may have, why NetSuite native matters. We'll have Mike do a live demo, and then we'll add some Q&A at the end for any questions that may come up. All right, awesome. So before we get into the solution, I wanted to just ground us in some of the reality that most AP teams are living with every day. And I'm guessing some of this is going to feel familiar to some of you guys. So you may have some people on your team manually recoding GL entries because the system didn't get it right the first time. You might have some line items that don't match across systems, so someone might be toggling between the tabs trying to reconcile. Exceptions might still be being tracked in spreadsheets, which you know may cause some internal visibility issues. And then potentially your transactions pending approval might be sitting in the wrong queue because your invoice details were coded incorrectly. The numbers we have back this up. So the industry research from Ardent Partners shows that the average invoice still takes over 10 days to process at nearly $10 a pop. And when you layer in that manual handling you may need to do when your invoices come in, you're looking at around 30% more errors and up to 5 times the cost. So the question here isn't whether this is a problem, it's why we're still accepting this as normal. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So what we wanted to kind of do to lead into this, we wanted to put out a bit of a quick questionnaire on this AP pain point. So the question we wanted to ask you guys today is what percentage of your vendor bills require manual adjustments after automation? So the answers we have that you can select here are less than 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 50%, more than 50%, and then we don't track this, which you may not track this today, but hopefully what you kind of learned during this webinar can help you guys track that. So we'll give everyone a second to answer this, and then we will share the responses. All right, awesome. Okay. So about 4% was less than 10%, 20% was 10 to 25%, about 26% was 25 to 50, 22% was more than 50, and then about 28 was that you don't currently track this, which is totally fine. So the majority is that you guys currently don't track it. So let's look at the poll results. So whether you said less than 10% or more than 50%, the fact that we're even asking this question tells you something. Manual adjustments after automation are currently the norm and not the exception, and that's worth unpacking. So I'm going to head to my next slide here. So what is the accuracy myth? So every vendor in this space will tell you they have about a 99% accuracy, but what they are actually measuring is the character level extraction. Can the system tell a 7 is a 7? That's table stakes. Most OCR tools, they can do that. But that's not where your team is probably spending their time. The real question is did the system assign the right GL account? Did it pull the correct line items and map them the way that your business expects? Because if someone still has to open the bill and fix the coding, that means the accuracy number is meaningless, and your poll answers confirm that. So that's why we focus on the touchless rate here at Charted. And these are the percentage of bills that go from intake to approval ready with zero manual edits. So that's kind of how you can think about that. Most vendors won't report this number because it is dramatically lower than what is headlined to you guys. A simple way to benchmark this number is you can look at the last 30 days of bills and count how many needed a correction. If you are above that 25% touchless rate, that's a great starting point, and that's the number Invoice AI is specifically designed to push higher over time. I'm going to let Mike take the next slide and kind of review how the Invoice AI learns on the charted side.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So let's dig into a couple of the different tools and ways that Invoice AI is able to learn about your business and increase that ability to bring invoices into the system and process them without you needing to make additional changes. So the first way that Invoice AI is able to learn over time is just by looking at historical bills in your system. So this works really well for a lot of coding information that you might be doing on a day-to-day basis. So let's say you receive a utility invoice from your utility vendor. It's typically coded to this general ledger account, this department, this class, so on and so forth. A lot of times that coding information, right, how you're going to internally classify that on the GL is not something that exists on the invoice, right? Your vendor doesn't tell you how to code it in your system. So that's something that AP professional is typically themselves, their data sources. Well, how has this bill been coded in the past inside the system? So Invoice AI is able to pick up on those patterns and use historical bill information to go ahead and make sure that things are coded correctly. Another way that Invoice AI is able to learn over time is actually through user corrections. So on some of the key pieces of information that might exist on the invoice number, say, or an invoice like the invoice number, like the date, something like that, even the vendor that should be selected inside a NetSuite. If Invoice AI doesn't get that right the first time, it's actually able to learn. You don't have to do any sort of point and clicking or anything like that. You can actually just go about your day and continue to process invoices from that vendor. Let's say you need to update the invoice number or something like that. And Invoice AI is able to learn from those corrections and use that logic going forward to increase the accuracy of the solution. The last tool that Invoice AI has for kind of learning and understanding how your business works is what we call AI directions. So AI directions are natural language prompts, or think of it as like additional context that you can provide Invoice AI for specific use cases or specific edge cases. The nice thing about AI directions is that this is all controlled at an account level and at a business level. All of these things that we're talking about here, whether it's AI directions, user corrections, or even historical bills, the nice thing about how Invoice AI works is this is making the solution smarter for you in your particular business. A lot of solutions out there might talk about continual learning, but they really kind of talk about that continual learning at a platform level. This is how our solution gets better over time across all of the invoices that we've seen. We're focused about how we can get better at reading your invoices, right? And you can see a quote from one of our customers here at the bottom of the screen here that kind of highlights that point. We had, IPA, a customer of ours that used to actually have I'm sorry, they were using another solution. And when they moved on to Invoice AI, they realized that they were actually able to notice this sort of learned behavior that we're talking about. Every solution is going to start at a certain base point and it's going to get better over time. So they noticed that Invoice AI, through all of these different methods, depending upon what was necessary, was able to start picking up things like how do we code our bills, where are our PO numbers, how do our invoice numbers look on the invoice, and continue to save you additional time as they process more. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide and we'll get into a little bit more information on AI directions. This is kind of an introduction to AI directions here. If you're not familiar with what these are, if you're not a customer of ours and never kind of heard of this idea, AI directions are our name for how to provide additional natural language instructions to help, we say, fine tune how invoices are interpreted. So I think of this as like your extraction agent. If you could give additional context to um, something like, I need to extract the account number, and that's going to exist in the upper right-hand corner of the invoice, right? That's something that a user could probably pick up on. We can give that additional context to Invoice AI when it's extracting a particular invoice for a particular vendor so that it's able to do that task for you. And again, the nice thing about these AI directions are it's all written in natural language, right? It's like you would interact with other AI tools out there. You don't have to know how to write scripts. You don't have to code. You don't have to do a lot of really technical work. We empower kind of the everyday, NetSuite administrator or super user to have this sort of tool in their toolkit to increase the accuracy of the solution over time. And you can see a couple other examples on the screen here. And what we're trying to do with all of these tools, remember back to Emma's last slide, when you look at something like a lot of other solutions out there, when they talk about accuracy, that accuracy number is highly focused on did we read the characters correctly on the screen? Um, that might seem great, but at the end of the day, if that doesn't translate into bills being entered correctly in the system, then you have a problem. So AI directions are a great tool for helping make sure that your expectations match the tool that you've picked, right? And some of those things that other solutions can't do because they're not flexible, they're very rigid in what they expect invoice numbers to look like, what they expect other details on the invoice to look like. AI directions empower you to give a little bit more context and unlock some additional tools for learning and interpreting invoices. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. Something else that we really focus on here at Charted is being NetSuite native, right? And you'll see that in the demo here in just a second. But one thing we like to highlight to both our customers and our prospects is that there's a real tax on your team and on your systems when you go with an integrated approach, when you go with an external tool of any nature, especially in the AP space. So we like to help our customers eliminate that integration tax. With external tools, you have things like two different systems that have to have two different databases that always have to stay in sync. You really don't have any one true system of record or source of truth because you're always wondering, is the information that I have over here also exist on this other system here? So with the NetSuite native solution, which is what Charted offers, you get the ability to process and create vendor bills directly inside of NetSuite. Your reporting becomes a whole lot easier because you can leverage standard NetSuite save searches and reports to instantly know kind of where you stand, whether you are using approvals or not using approvals. The data exists there inside of NetSuite, and you can easily leverage either standard out-of-the-box NetSuite reports that exist or custom save searches and reports that you've set up to have a clear understanding of where you stand. Again, you don't have to worry about the disconnect in two different systems and wondering if you're missing any sort of data. At the bottom is another quote from one of our customers. You can see that this customer did used to have two separate systems, one for their AP system and then another that they used for AP automation. When they moved on to NetSuite, they were looking for a single solution that could handle everything, right? So they selected NetSuite as their ERP and then brought our AP automation tools into that. And they really highlighted how that single source of truth to know when everything comes into the system and it gets posted. There's no need to wait for things to sync or anything like that. They really noticed that night and day difference from two external systems to having everything live and operate directly inside of the ERP. If you want to read more about that customer or even the customer that we mentioned on our last slide, we do have some case studies that you can go follow up and kind of read a little bit more about their individual stories and why they chose Charted to solve some of these problems on our website. All right, so with that, I think we're gonna go to the next slide and transition into a demo. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. While I'm doing that, after we finish the demo, we are going to hopefully have enough time at the end to dive into some questions. So if you do have any questions, I'll just quickly highlight there's a Q&A section within the Zoom webinar. So feel free to drop some questions down in there. And like I said, assuming we're going to have a little bit of time at the end here, we're happy to dive into some questions that you all might be wondering about or wanting to ask at the end. All right, so as you can see here, I'm sharing my screen. I am in an environment of NetSuite, highlighting what we talked about on the last slide. We are a NetSuite native solution, so we do think that that has a lot of advantages to our customers, that you have that one source of truth, that you don't have to go log into another portal, and you don't have to even teach your users in your system, your users another system that they have to integrate with. They're used to NetSuite, so let's keep them inside of NetSuite and continue to let them do their job. On my home dashboard here, I do have our portlet, which is a nice way for AP professionals right when they log into NetSuite to be able to act and see what they need to do. So you can see I have some bills sitting in my inbox that I need to review, as well as some information about bills that are sitting out in different statuses of approval. I'm going to jump into our inbox. And again, if you're not familiar with our product, our AP inbox is kind of the central hub where all invoices are going to come into. So invoices can come in either through email, or you can drag and drop invoices directly into the inbox to have them uploaded and scanned in real time. The inbox is going to contain some high-level information about what was extracted off of the invoice. So things like, what vendor was this associated with? What subsidiary was this associated with? If you're a multi-subsidiary organization, PO numbers, invoice numbers, etc. There are also some actions that you can take on items within the inbox. So if you are a larger team, you do have a larger AP team, you might have multiple AP professionals that are responsible for processing different invoices, and we can automate the steps of kind of assigning ownership is what we call it. So who's responsible for processing that particular item? And let's say something comes in, but it's actually something that Emma needs to process. I could easily reassign this to Emma. I think you're in this account, Emma. Let's see. Oh, yep. So I can just easily reassign this to Emma. When she logs into the inbox to process her items, she could go ahead and proceed with processing that. This works really nicely in conjunction with some of our filtering that we have in the inbox, right? So I have things filtered down to just what I'm responsible for processing, but someone else can have filters set to what they're responsible for processing. When you are ready to process items with the inbox, it's really just as easy as clicking into a corresponding line, and that's going to take you into our split screen view. Again, touting some of our NetSuite nativeness. On the left side of the screen, you're going to see the invoice that was scanned by Invoice AI. And on the right side of the screen, we actually show you your standard NetSuite vendor bill form. So if you're live on NetSuite today and you already have your vendor bill form set up, customized the way that you need for your organization, fields laid out the way that your users are familiar with, our solution is going to use that same form, right? So there's no need to reinvent the wheel there or train your users a new product. We really just bring that automation of, hey, let's not make your users do the data entry. Let's use a system and AI to be able to process that in and of itself. Here's where we can highlight some of the learning that Invoice AI is able to do, kind of tying it back to the slide here. So we can see when it scanned this particular vendor invoice that I received from the vendor, it was able to populate things like, this is the vendor this should be associated with. This is the invoice number. This is the date. At the line level, it brought in the line level information off of this invoice. But then it also tried to code this invoice. So it filled in a general ledger account for me, a department, and a location. How it gets those pieces of information is that first level of learning that I was talking about, right? So my vendor doesn't tell me what general ledger account or department I should code this invoice to, and typically they don't. That information is typically something that your team knows, and maybe comes from years of being with the business and processing hundreds, if not thousands, or tens of thousands of invoices. But it's typically just because, hey, I received an invoice from Bright Edge Services. This is what it's typically coded to, so that's the way that I'm going to code it to. So the way that we're learning and able to pick up on that coding information is by looking at historical bills in the system and say, hey, invoices for provided services to the charted subsidiary are typically coded to these sorts of accounts and these departments and these sort of things. So let's go ahead and populate it that way again. So that's one level of learning that we kind of highlighted on the last screen there. The next level of learning, though, that I did mention is the ability to learn from user changes. So let's say in this example, maybe this isn't something you really want to do, but just to highlight the point, let's say on this particular example, I wanted to capture this incident number as the invoice number or as the unique identifier inside of NetSuite. So I could easily just change this invoice number right here and say, hey, I'm actually going to say that the invoice number should be 80037. And I'm going to go ahead and save this bill. What Invoice AI is actually going to try to do with that information is it is going to say, okay, where did that user get that value? Can I figure out how they determined that from the invoice itself? And it's going to try to auto learn that, right? So I don't have to do anything else other than just go through the process of entering the invoices the way that I want them to to enter them inside the system, and Invoice AI can start picking up on those individual details. So what's actually going to happen is the next time I scan an invoice for, bright edge cleaners, because it does learn that sort of behavior just for that one particular vendor. The next time I upload an invoice for that particular vendor, it's going to try to pick up that incident number as the invoice number versus the actual number at the top of the invoice itself. So you can see, here's an example of how it did that. This time it says, oh, okay, let me look for the actual invoice number there, the incident number there, I'm sorry, and I'll go ahead and populate that as the invoice number here itself. So that can work on a lot of the key pieces of data that you might be extracting off of the invoice, like the invoice number, maybe the date that's on the invoice, things like that. Invoice AI can actually learn from those without you needing to go in and do a bunch of different extra work. It's just learning as you go through and process invoices itself. The last sort of learning that can happen on Invoice AI is learning through AI directions. And we are going to be having a deeper dive on this in our next session. So this is just a quick preview into AI directions if you're new to our product or not super familiar with them. But as I talked about in the slides, AI directions are natural language prompts that allow you to change certain behavior about either custom things that you want Invoice AI to extract or some of our standard logic too. So in this particular example, I used an AI direction, and I'll show it to you here in just a second. I wanted to pick up these service periods, right? So let's say this particular invoice that I received from this vendor, maybe these service periods drive an amortization schedule or how I want to allocate this particular expense. So it's really important that I get those off of the invoice itself. But I don't want a user to have to manually type these every single time. So that's a great use case for a direction. If there's something that exists on the invoice itself that we can figure out by extracting, some sort of text off the invoice, we can leverage an AI direction to get that off of the invoice and get it somewhere inside of NetSuite. So I chose to just populate those into the standard NetSuite start and end date fields that exist on the line level. Again, maybe this is because I'm going to select an amortization schedule and amortize this over a period of time or whatnot. Or maybe I just want it for reporting purposes, right? I'm going to run save searches after the fact, and having everything inside of NetSuite, having that single source of truth. This is another one of those value adds to a native solution. I can now pull those start and end dates into a save search and have additional visibility into how those things are allocated and done. So the way that that sort of AI direction works is inside of the system, those natural, like we talked about natural language prompting. So here's the example of what I did for that example that I just showed you here. We're looking for certain keywords on the invoice. So I just have it set up to say, hey, if you see service period on the invoice, I want you to try to extract those dates, those start dates and those end dates. Again, you can see how this is just very simple, natural language. This is what I want you to do. This is what you're looking for those particular data points that I'm asking you to look for on this invoice. I didn't have to write any custom scripts. I didn't have to open a support ticket with us to be able to do this. These are tools that exist inside of your account and are, again, specifically scoped to your account, right? So you're helping give additional context to kind of think of it as your scanning model, right? How invoices are interpreted for your business without, messing with or worrying about overall learning and how other customers are affected. Awesome. So with that, scanning is just the first part of the process, right? So once the invoice comes in and it is extracted by Invoice AI, that's not where the value ends with our solution of being able to provide automation. We also have a lot of automation around approvals and other things that your team might be doing, chasing people down. So we do have a very flexible approval automation solution that can help you route your bills for approval on a lot of different by a lot of different criterias. So we can do things based with something like, hey, this vendor route to a particular user, but we can also do a lot more complex approval processes as well, right? So one of the things that a lot of our customers come to us for is what we call matrix-based approvals. So let's say you have a pretty complex approval process, and if the bill is for this account, or maybe, sorry, for this department and for this subsidiary, we want it to route to a particular approver. But if it's in a different subsidiary for the finance department, it's this other approver right here, right? Those approval processes can get very complex very quickly. We have the ability to make sure that, by setting up an approval matrix, your approvals always route to the correct approver that they're meant to route to. This is another way that you can add time savings to that process. And like we're talking about, I mean, the ultimate goal for the AP team is, how do we get the easy stuff out of the pipeline, right? How do we get the straightforward items out of the pipeline and let our AP team really focus on those items that require a little bit more of their attention? So getting those things processed quickly and getting them routed to the correct approver adds a lot of value to your organization. We also do send out approval emails, right? So you're not worried about sending out an email to the user and saying, hey, is this bill approved or is this not approved? The system can automatically do that. Here's an example of what one of our approval emails might look like. It's going to include information about the record, in this case, the bill that's submitted for approval directly in the body of the email. It's going to include information about the approval history. So as this goes through additional approval steps, as it's required, I, as an approver, the next level approver can see that people underneath them maybe have approved. It's also going to include an attachment with the invoice. Really, this gives me all the visibility I need as an approver to make an informed decision on whether I want to approve this or not directly from the email. Another nice thing that's nice about our approvals is you are able to approve this without the need for a NetSuite license or even access to NetSuite. So if I want to approve this, I can easily just click the approve button or the reject button, enter a quick comment if I'd like to, send that back into the system. That'll capture my approval or my rejection if I decide to reject it, and move it through the additional steps. So this really helps give your team flexibility to focus on those things, again, that do require your attention. We can handle the approvals. We can make sure that approvers are notified when they need to approve, even reminded when they forget to approve, right? We can set up automated reminders to go through and remind them after X amount of days, so you're not stuck with those follow-up tasks as well. After that, again, because the bill is inside of NetSuite, if we go back into the system here and I do refresh, we should see that approval is captured. There are approve and reject buttons. So obviously, if you have access to NetSuite, you can approve inside the system as well. But we capture all of the approval steps and approval history inside of NetSuite. So you have one source of truth. You can see those approval comments. And if there's additional steps that you want in your approval process, I only have a one-step approval process in this demo account, but you want to have 2, 3, 4 steps in your approval process, you can absolutely do that. When I used to work on our implementation team back in the day, I worked with a customer that had 30 steps in their approval process, right? So lots of options for what you want to do and how you want to handle your approvals, and take that out of an AP task and build that into the system to be a little bit more automated. So once the bill is approved, again, it's going to post inside the GL. So you have that inside of NetSuite. It's going to hit the GL. You're going to have that system's single source of truth. It can be paid. We do have a payment automation product as well. Not going to really focus on that here today, but just to highlight that. So once the bill comes in, we can help streamline that payment process and get those payments sent out to the vendor through various different methods. The last thing I do want to cover before we jump back to the slides and then open it up for some questions here. Jumping back to the inbox, this is some functionality that we recently added. So if you are a current customer or new, this adds some nice additional automation into the product. And that's the ability to process credit notes, right? So NetSuite stores credits, vendor credits on a different record than the vendor bill. And that creates some complexities for some people. It's like, hey, this actually needs to be a credit. I received it from my vendor. So now we have an easy way to handle that and add additional automation into your process. So something like this comes in, you actually realize that it's a vendor credit. You can easily just switch this over and say, hey, I want to process this as a vendor credit, That'll reload the standard NetSuite vendor credit record. It'll populate the information like we do the vendor bill record and make it really easy and seamless to get these entered into NetSuite as well. So whether you're handling credits or vendor bills, we try to keep this process as seamless as possible of getting those items into NetSuite. So with that, that's the end of my demo. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Emma. I think we have a couple more slides to walk through, and then we'll get into some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And yes, very excited about our new bill credit functionality that we just rolled out. So let's review our key takeaways from Mike's demo on what you guys should be doing to determine whether the invoice processing tool that you're currently using is actually working for you and your company. So measure what matters. Track your touchless processing rate. Don't listen to those headline accuracy percentages. Use that 30-day benchmark to determine your touchless rate. So if you remember, these are the percentage of bills that go from intake to approval ready with 0 manual edits. So within the next 30 days, maybe go through this exercise and see what your touchless rate would be. Demand that your AI tool learns. It should get smarter over time. So it shouldn't require additional templates. Every save that happens should allow your AI tool to learn your specific vendor's invoices every time, and then allow there to be less and less manual entry for your team. Use those plain language prompts. So AI directions that Mike just showed, those should let you handle the edge cases that pop up. So instead of having to deal with the edge cases manually and being like, okay, this is an edge case, we need to actually manually make this edit. These directions can be set up to streamline your process and streamline that processing time for your AP team. And then stay native. So one system, one source of truth, no integration overhead. You guys are most likely already using NetSuite as your ERP and your source of truth. So why not automate your AP process inside of the system and leave out that integration tax that we spoke about? So what's happening next? So what is the second session of our Invoice AI Masterclass series for NetSuite? So we have our second session happening on Thursday, May 14th, and this will happen at the same time, so 11 a.m. Eastern. This one will be really focused on those AI directions in action and go through those real invoice processing scenarios inside of NetSuite. So kind of a little bit what Mike just dove into, it will be more detailed within those AI directions. And that will be run by Matt Nelson, our chartered customer success manager, and then Mike again. And then I believe we're putting a sign up link in the chat currently for this second session. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to sign up. And then we do have a third session. So this is happening on June 17th, and we're going to allow your help to kind of pick what we should focus on within that session. So next session, we have the AI directions, and then we have 2 options here. So our first option is under the hood, the AI powering invoice automation. And this will be the breakdown of different types of AI and how it works like behind the scenes to keep your data safe. And then the second option that we have is the touchless invoice and what it takes to get there. So what fully automated processing actually requires, common bottlenecks that we sometimes see, and how to benchmark your touchless rate. So we have some options here. So feel free to vote for what you like to see in session 3. We aren't going to share those results today, but stay tuned to see what our session 3 will be focused on. So we will give everyone a second to respond to that, and then we'll go ahead and get into questions. Awesome. All right, we'll get into those questions. So you guys should see, we should have a little Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that may have come up during the demo or our presentation here. We'll also give everyone a moment for these. Awesome, we have some questions coming in. All right. Mike, are you ready for our first question?
Yep, let's go for it.
All right. So does Invoice AI learn from every change I make on the bill record? Why would I ever need to use AI directions?
Yes, that's a good question. I kind of highlighted this a little bit during the presentation, but we can definitely get into this in a little bit more detail in our next session. So something you're interested in or you asked the question, try to sign up for our next session. But Invoice AI's kind of built-in learning is more on some of the core fields like I talked about. So, hey, I had to update the invoice number. I had to update maybe the date. I selected a different vendor. That's where it's going to work really well for coding or learning how to update those things in the future. Part of the reason for that is there's just an expectation that those things exist on the invoice. There could be other details that are not, maybe they're not typical to show up on an invoice, like the start and end date. That might be another example of not everyone's going to need start and end dates on extracted off of their invoice. Or for some people, they might not want Invoice AI to try to figure out those things. So that's really where kind of the divide comes between, is it kind of a standard core field? Auto learning is typically going to work well. If it's not kind of a core field, directions are the fallback. And most of the time, when we're going through an implementation with us, we do typically say, hey, for the most part, let's see what Invoice AI learns. Let's give it a little bit of time to learn. And then directions can be used for continuous improvement over time for things that are more edge cases and are not being picked up correctly.
Awesome. All right, our next question. What if you have invoices that have supplementary pages to attach, example, a statement of work? Can it handle multiple attachments as well as the invoice?
So that depends on how it's structured and how it's sent into the system. So we can definitely get into that use case with you in a little bit more detail to understand what's how it would work for your particular case. But yeah, we do have customers that, have an invoice sent in. Maybe the first page is the invoice, the first 3 pages is the invoice, and then they provide additional sort of pages, additional sort of context within that same file that can flow into the system from a, ingestion standpoint. It's good at understanding, this is the invoice, and then maybe these additional pages don't have invoice details. We can definitely handle that. We do scan everything that comes in as an invoice, right? So if there's multiple attachments, there can be some nuances there to that question, and you just want to make sure that that's handled correctly the way that your vendors send in those bills.
Awesome. And then we have another one right here. Oops, sorry, I just lost it. We have where's the start date and end date and the invoice description, where will it be extracted to? Is it a customized field on the template?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we'll get into this more as we talk about AI directions in our next session, but that's something you can pick. So there's kind of two parts to AI directions in that particular example. The first part was the natural language prompt. This is what I want you to look for on the invoice. And then the second piece is where do you want that to be brought into NetSuite? It can be a custom field, standard fields can be used. So you set up both the what are we trying to get off of the invoice, and then where do you want that brought into NetSuite and populated onto your vendor bill record.
Awesome. And then we'll do one or two more. I have bill credit creation. So a question based on the bill credit process. Can it be associated with an existing bill?
Yeah, so all of those exist on the bill credit form. So when you say associate, I think one thing you might be thinking about is the transform process. If you click like credit on a bill record, it like takes everything that's on that bill record and copies it over to a vendor credit for you. And then I believe, operating off the top of my head here, it automatically selects on the apply tab that you want to apply it to that bill. So because we're using the standard NetSuite credit record with our process, like we do the standard NetSuite bill record, we're not going to necessarily auto-select the bill that you want to apply it to, but you would have the ability that apply tab does exist there. And you would be able to select, okay, I want to go ahead and apply this to whatever bill in the system for that particular vendor during the creation process. So you can do it then, or you can use standard NetSuite to apply credits later down the fact, like when you're generating payments.
Awesome. And then we did get, I'll do one more. So we did get a question, and it says, how does this impact NetSuite user count as more users are added into the AP workflow? And then do you have Canadian customers?
Yeah, so we definitely have Canadian customers. If you have particular questions about like how this would work, for the way that your instance of NetSuite is set up, maybe in different markets, definitely reach out to us and we can get into that in more detail from a more user standpoint, right? So we don't require, as I mentioned on the approval side of things, we don't require users to have access to NetSuite to be able to approve. You would have to have access to NetSuite to be able to create bills and access that inbox that I talked about. So that's just something to think about from a license count. You would need to make sure your AP team has NetSuite licenses to be able to process bills. The tools, we have built some tools in there, like I talked a little bit about. It wasn't the focus of this webinar, so we can go over this in more detail if you have additional questions. We do have tools that can kind of automatically assign things, make sure that the different users get assigned as owners, and you can kind of filter down and say, hey, this is just what I need to focus on. So that can help those larger AP teams when you do have more users and trying to keep everyone straight and make sure that they're focused on their individual items.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And I did see a question on there that asked if we'll be sending the recording out. So yes, we'll be sending the recording out to everyone who is registered. So you guys will be able to watch this back. All right. Awesome. Okay, great. So this is kind of the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining what real AI invoice processing looks like in NetSuite. Again, we'll get this recording out to you guys, and we'll see you for session 2.